Between the year 2000 and 2023, China made 1,306 loans to African nations. That is not a typo. 1,306 loans, totaling $182 billion. Roads, railways, ports, dams, stadiums, power plants. The infrastructure Africa had been begging the West to build for 50 years, China came and built it. And now, the bills are due. Today we are going to find out what Africa actually agreed to, and whether this is a new partnership or a very old trap with a new face.
To understand why Africa said yes to China, you first have to understand what Africa was being told by everyone else. For decades, the World Bank and IMF came to Africa with loans, but attached to those loans were long lists of conditions. Cut your public spending, open your markets, privatize your industries, do it our way or get nothing. China came with a completely different offer. No conditions, no lectures about democracy or governance, no requirements to change your economic system. Just one rule: don't recognize Taiwan as an independent country. And the money was real. Kenya got a $3.6 billion loan to build the standard gauge railway, the biggest infrastructure project in the country since independence. Ethiopia got its first ever railway in 100 years. Angola got roads across the entire country. Nigeria got power plants.
$182 billion. Total Chinese loans to 49 African countries between 2000 to 2023. Source: Boston University Global Development Policy Center, 2025. Here is where it starts to get complicated. Most Chinese loan contracts in Africa contain a clause that reads, and I am paraphrasing from actual documents published by the research group Aid Data, "The borrower shall keep all terms and conditions of this agreement strictly confidential. Without prior consent of the lender, the borrower shall not disclose any information." African governments were legally prevented from telling their own citizens what they had agreed to. In 2022, researchers at Aid Data obtained and published the full contract for Uganda's Entebbe International Airport expansion, a $200 million loan from China's Exim Bank. What they found was described by Aid Data's executive director as having more aggressive terms than anything we have seen before. The contract required the Ugandan government to channel all revenues from the airport, not just from the new expansion, but from the entire existing airport, into a bank account jointly controlled with China's Exim Bank. Uganda had to repay the loan before it could spend that money on hospitals, schools, or anything else. 20 years. Every shilling the airport earns, spoken for. The lender is asking not just for revenues from the new projects they funded, but from the underlying asset that already existed. Bradley Parks, Executive Director, Aid Data, AFP 2022. Djibouti, a tiny country at the mouth of the Red Sea, owes 57% of its entire external debt to China. In 2017, China opened its first ever overseas military base, right there in Djibouti, next to the port it helped finance. In Kenya, the Mombasa port was listed as collateral for the standard gauge railway loan. When Kenya struggled to repay, there were real questions about whether one of Africa's most strategic ports could end up under Chinese control. This is the version of the story the contracts were never supposed to show anyone. Now here is the part that honest journalism requires us to say. Between 2000 and 2019, China canceled $3.4 billion of African debt outright. Another $15 billion was restructured, meaning China gave countries more time at better rates. No assets were seized, no ports were taken. Not one. A major study by the Rhodium Group looked at 38 Chinese debt renegotiations across 24 countries and found that most were resolved in favor of the borrower. China extended loans, lowered interest, forgave portions. This is not the behavior of a lender trying to steal your infrastructure. And here is the argument African leaders who chose China actually make, and it deserves to be heard. At least something got built.
The West demanded privatization and structural reform for 30 years, and Africa's roads stayed broken. China came and laid tarmac. Whatever the terms, those roads exist. A 2022 study found that African nations actually owe 3 times more to Western private creditors than to China, and those Western creditors charge double the interest rate. Nobody makes documentaries about that.
Then the decade ended, and the bills arrived all at once. Chinese lending to Africa, which peaked at $28.8 billion in 2016, collapsed to just $2.1 billion in 2024, a 93% drop. China had stopped building. Now it wanted to be paid back. In 2025, the world's poorest countries owe China $35 billion in debt repayments, due in a single year. $22 billion of that comes from 75 of the world's most vulnerable nations. According to the Lowy Institute, those repayments are now directly competing with spending on health and education. Zambia became the first African nation to default on its Chinese debt, owing $17 billion in total. It took 3 years of negotiations just to restructure the terms. Angola, China's largest African borrower, having taken nearly $50 billion between 2000 and 2024, has been paying its debt back not in cash, but in oil. Every barrel of Angolan crude that ships to China is a debt payment. Angola is literally selling its future to pay for its past. One researcher from the Lowy Institute put it plainly. For the rest of this decade, China will be more debt collector than banker to the developing world. And here is the detail that reveals the full picture. Kenya's standard gauge railway, China's most celebrated African project, has never generated enough revenue to cover its own operating costs, let alone repay the loan. Chinese companies built it. Chinese companies now operate it. Kenyan workers were trained, but the management contracts stayed Chinese. Between 2020 and 2024, 20 African countries experienced net outflows to China, meaning they sent more money to Beijing than they received. Total extraction in that period, $33.8 billion.
We analyze the SGR financial gap today as Kenya's revenue struggles against the rising cost of debt repayments, leading to a widening deficit.
So, is China Africa's savior or its new colonizer? The honest answer is it is neither. And it is both, depending entirely on who negotiated the deal. China did not invent Africa's debt problem. It did not invent extractive finance or hidden contract clauses or infrastructure that serves the lender more than the borrower. It learned those tools from the same Western playbook that shaped the last 200 years. What is different and what matters is that a new generation of African economists, lawyers, and leaders is learning to read the fine print. Countries like Zambia pushed back. Uganda pushed back on China Exim Bank's demand to control airport spending decisions, and China backed down. The terms were changed. It is possible to negotiate. Africa does not need charity. It doesn't need to choose between Washington and Beijing. It needs what every continent that escaped poverty eventually got: the power to set the terms of its own deals. The roads China built are real. The railways exist. The debt is real too. The question for the next decade is simple and enormous. Who drives the train?